All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Urbana I.D.O.T. Traffic Stop Data Task Force to order. It is Wednesday, March 18th, 2015. Can we have a roll call, please?
Andrew Charles. Nicole Anderson Cobb. Shinjini Chattopadhyay. Eric Jacobson. Alejandra Coronel.
Here.
Peter Resnick.
Here.
William Kiles. Patricia Avery.
Present.
Chandra Somerville. Paul Testa.
Here.
All right, we are one short of a quorum. I'd say let's go ahead. We obviously can't vote on approving the agenda or the minutes for this evening. We'll postpone the minutes for the time being. I would like to at least start running through our subcommittee reports. If we get a quorum at some point, we'll do that. And I know that Ms. Avery said she has to leave a little early tonight, so I'm inclined to have the community impact report first, and then we'll go through the rest. So why don't we start with that piece of old business? Patricia, would you like to introduce? I saw that we had a report in the packet.
Yes. Thank you for allowing me to present our committee report first. I do apologize. I do have to leave a bit early tonight. But I did submit for your review our preliminary report. Within the report is just an overview of the work that the subcommittee has done thus far. We talk about, we give a sample of what, well, let's just rewind for a moment. The work of the impact subcommittee is really focusing on what the impact of the traffic stops have on the minority driving population. And we're looking at impacts such as economic impact. We're looking at psychological impacts that it might have, social impacts that these traffic stops might have, along with the physiological impact that they have. And so we've done we've looked at a number of different reports that have shared some of the information. And most recently, I have looked at the Department of Justice report on Ferguson. It provided recognizing that the city of Urbana is not Ferguson, and we don't have the cases, the cases that the problems and the situations that we see in Ferguson. But we do know that it did look at a lot of the traffic, the lot of impacts that traffic stops have on communities of color. So I provided just in our report a sample of one case, an economic impact case that was cited in that report. Also, what I provided in our report was some of the testimony from our February 21st town hall meeting. And these were just some of the comments that were written from Paul Wood, who was the reporter that was there at our town hall meeting. I would have liked to, because I said it's preliminary, I have not had an opportunity, or Alejandra has not had an opportunity to comb through the other information that we were provided with, some online surveys. We also have some surveys that were taken during the time of the town hall meeting that we have not been able to review, or that would have been, some of that sampling would have been a part of our report, but because we have not been able to do that, it's not a part of this report. I've asked for an extended timeline in the scope of our work to expand it, because one thing that the DOJ report did provide for me was a little bit more of an insight as to what information that I might look at from an impact perspective, point of view. And so in reading the report, I'd like to really be able to go and observe some actual traffic stop proceedings. I mean, that's just observing and taking maybe doing some on-the-spot interviews with some of the people that might be coming out of the traffic stops to talk about. I mean, I'm sure that I will be able to find out during the proceedings whether or not these traffic stops were in Urbana, because most times they give an address where the stop was taken. Was it on Bradley Avenue, or we'll know if the stop was in Urbana, and I would like to be able to interview some of those individuals on the spot after they come out of court. So I'm going to be going in to observe traffic court proceedings. Also, I would like to be able to look at the fees and fines. I think we talked about that because that has a serious impact, and I don't know. I haven't met with the staff yet to see what numbers that the staff has in terms of what economic impact has. But I would like to do a little bit more research on the fees and fines, and I think we also talked about seizure of property, what kind of impact that may have on an individual in terms of traffic stops. Sometimes individuals get stopped and their cars are impounded, and if they can't afford to get the cars out from the impoundment, they sometimes lose their property, or the fees are compounded, and it is the financial impact is tremendous. So I'd like to do a little bit more research and on that particular impact, and have that be a part of our final report as well. The fourth thing is I would like to convene a focus group in April. We talked about this. We talked about our town hall, and then we talked about convening a more professional focus group with maybe the police, members of our police department. Maybe we would have youth. They're young drivers that, they're high flyers. And also maybe someone from the mental health profession, just some focus groups, professional focus groups, or just focus groups that I'd like to convene sometimes in mid-April as our second meeting. And then finally, I would like for our committee to work with members of our committee here, the Committee of Whole, and also staff to actually review and go through and compile all of this data that we're going to collect into some kind of a final report. And hopefully, and I apologize, Chair Resnick, we have not discussed whether or not we did receive that extension. But in my report, I say that I'm requesting that we at least get an additional 4 to 6 weeks to complete our work in this committee so that we can do all of these observations and compile even more information to put into our final report.
So before we go to questions, I wanted to go through a couple of the pragmatic issues.
Okay.
Todd, at this point, has the City Council seen our report yet, or have they voted? I presume they haven't voted, or you would have told me.
No, we'll present it in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Obviously, yeah, the sooner the better would be great, so that we at least, if we have to make that April 30th deadline, obviously that changes a whole lot of stuff.
Sure.
Do you have a sense, have you spoken to any of the City Council members, whether this is plausible? I know Eric's not here tonight to ask him.
Yeah, he would probably be a better resource.
Okay.
My understanding is that from the very beginning, the mayor has been supportive if there needed to be an extension of time.
Okay. So hopefully we'll get word on that rather quickly and be able to go forward. there were a couple of other, so as far as fine data, Paul's report this month has a bunch of stuff in it that I think, and this is the point at which we sort of imagined that the subcommittee stuff was going to start to combine. So if you go through Paul's fine data from his report this month,
Okay.
see if you need anything additional as far as impacts for your report.
Okay.
I think that would make sense.
Okay.
I think as far as doing a focus group, that you should probably send mail to Todd and see what the logistics of doing that are. I would love to do that. Again, assuming the extension comes through, I think we need that additional data.
Yes.
I was glad you pointed out the Ferguson report. I just to use privilege of chair for a second, I read the report the first time, and aside from being, it's a depressing report, obviously, but there was this point of just feeling a little dejected, like, oh man, they did such an extensive job, and we should have answered all of the questions that they put forward. And I thought, oh yeah, wait a minute, we're 10 people volunteering for the city of Urbana. We are not the FBI.
That's
with the Department of Justice asking the FBI to investigate all this stuff. So I think it's worth everybody reading the report as far as you can get through it. It's rather lengthy.
It's 102 pages.
But it will give you an idea for each of the folks, sort of laying out the data and how we're going to present our report. I think, thankfully, as you pointed out, we are not Ferguson. We do not have the kinds of issues they have there. But
goodness.
it's very informative for the kinds of things we are dealing with, the kinds of questions we should be answering.
I absolutely think it is, and it does provide kind of a roadmap, even though we don't have the same issues. We are dealing with the same population. We're talking about our minority driving drivers who, ever since we've started to collect this data, there has been there's a shown disparity in the numbers, and so the one thing that really bubbles to the surface for me is that I know that the city of Urbana has been working at this for some time. And in one of the reports, I think it was a news article, I don't know who the reporter was, but they were talking about how, well, maybe they'll get something out of this. We've been at this for a while. And I think that's why I put in my report, we want to get it right. We don't want to just have some report that we submit that doesn't get where we need to go. And so I think looking at that report did bring some other things that we might want to take a look at. So hopefully the council will grant us our request, and we'll get a little more time, because quite frankly, I don't even think I could have a final report done by April, knowing that there are so many gaps in the report. I hope that they will grant us our request.
I hope and am relatively optimistic of that too. The other administrative comment I wanted to make was, I know Todd had mentioned to me that we're having a transcription service go through the town hall meeting to transcribe it to paper.
Good.
So hopefully that will assist you working through your committee to be able to pull out the particular things for your final report. Any questions about the subcommittee report or comments? Andy, please.
There were just a couple of things that jumped out at me. One was the synopsis of the town hall meeting. I think it's important that we're accurate on what we reflect, especially in these subcommittee reports, because the devil's in the details sometimes. On the recap of Ms. Coward's accounting of her interactions, on our recap it says that she said she was stopped just because of my color. And she did make that statement, but it's also important to note that she described running over the curb before that, and the officer witnessed her running over the curb, and that's something that changes this from the officer witnessed something that community-wide, I think we want people to our officers to be aware that when somebody runs over the curb, we probably ought to check on them and make sure they're not drunk and make sure that they're not having a medical emergency, make sure that everything's okay, and then if it is, send them on their way, which is in fact what happened here. So I think the devil's in the details, and we have to make sure that we tell the full story when we tell the stories. And I'm thrilled to hear you say that this is not Ferguson, because in fact it's not Ferguson. I did read the Department of Justice study, and it's horrific, and it's a study of, it's something that should be looked at, and if you recognize your department when you see these things, or your city or your court system, it should set up a red flag. But we're not Ferguson, and the problems we're facing here, as you know, the town hall meeting I think is just one sampling, but we had very few people describe incidents that took place in Urbana, and the incidents that were described very often ended like the one with Ms. Cowart, where she was upset by this. It had an impact on her, a psychological impact. It was a negative interaction with the police in her mind, but she did describe a reason to be stopped, and she was released without any fine or economic impact on her. Tying this in with what Paul put out on the financial impact and the fines, I was fascinated by that, and I mentioned that to Paul before the meeting, that I think it's very telling when you study what's in there, that in fact, let's see if we can find it here, the numbers of the percentage of people stopped that received tickets is very even over the course of the 10-year study, with the exception of Hispanic drivers, which jumps off the page as being much higher. But over 10 years of ticket or stops, 57% of the white drivers, 57.5% actually, percent of the white drivers that were stopped were cited, while 59.8% of the African American drivers were cited. So there's a difference there, but it's certainly not the disparity we see with the stops. The disparity with the stops, as has been pointed out numerous times to us, is the issue. But even when we look at the fine amounts, and that was page 37 of Paul's information that he sent out, but when we look at the fine amounts that go out, because the courts is certainly an important part of the Ferguson study, the courts, how they interacted. When we look at the fine amounts and the disparities between white drivers and African American drivers, in the 10 categories that are evaluated, the white drivers are actually fined higher amounts than the African American drivers. What does jump off the page when we look at the African American drivers that were stopped was that 3 of the top 4 traffic citations that they received are actually secondary violations. What I mean by that is this. Of the 4 top traffic citations that were written to African American drivers, operating of an uninsured motor vehicle was number 1, driving on a suspended license was number 2, driving 15 to 20 miles an hour over the limit was number 3, and being unlicensed was number 4. 3 of those things are not something that an officer will stop you for unless they have personal knowledge about you being suspended, but they're things that when the other stop is made come to light. So that's something with the economic impact that certainly has to be looked at. And something that you said in your when you were going over this that I think kind of jumped out to me was the economic impact of impounding cars, because that's something that we do here. But we do that for a very limited number of things. And I'm stretching my mind here to try and remember them. I know if your driver's license is revoked, we impound your car. If your registration on your car is suspended for not having insurance, not just not having insurance, but actually it's gone through the process and it's been suspended for not having insurance, we impound your car. I believe fleeing and eluding a police officer, we may impound on that. And those are the 3 that I can think of off the top of my head. But they're serious offenses that it's not a mystery to you that's happened. You're aware when these things, because you've had previous court interactions before this. So we don't impound nearly as much, and certainly there's no culture, as described in the Department of Justice report, of fundraising through the police department. So that's the good news for us here. The other thing I want to comment on, I was very interested in what you had to say about interviewing people coming out of traffic court. I think that's a great idea, but I think that might not be the target audience that we want. We might get a better result with surveys sent to a certain number of people stopped, rather than just the people coming out of traffic court, because the people coming out of traffic court are a very small percentage of the people actually stopped and cited. I know we've done that in the past with some surveys sent to people about how their interaction with the officers went, and that may be something, I don't know. Mr. Rent can tell us if that's something that may be a possibility, but certainly, Paul and some others have come up with some good surveys, and what we had at the town hall meeting I thought was very good. Something similar to that sent to, it may be overly burdensome to send to all, but to a select number might be a better representation of what the experience was for people.
That's interesting, Andrew, that you said the amount of fines for Caucasians were higher than the amount of fines for African Americans. But then, on the other hand, you were saying that the African Americans received multiple citations. And so if you add all, I don't know how that's all factored into the calculation of those numbers. And the other thing is that I think you mentioned stops in comparison to the Caucasians and the African American, or the minority. We know your observation in the report was that Latinos they jumped off the page for you, but
for getting fined for citations.
For citations. Oh, okay. So, but my thing, and also I'd like to mention in the report, is that we, looking at the safety stops opposed to the investigatory stops, I think that that we need to look a little deeper into those opposed to, who's getting the safety stops, because clearly in this book that we read, Pulled Over: How Police Stops Define Race and Citizenship, there clearly is a disparity there, and I think that there probably is a disparity in who's getting the investigatory stops and the safety stops, and I like that to be defined. Is that defined in Paul? Is that in your report as well, Paul? I apologize. I didn't get a chance to look at your
I'm
numbers.
sorry for not sending out sooner. And I guess, I think that's one of the, million-dollar questions of, it's very hard with just the I.D.O.T data to say this stop was clearly traffic safety, this stop was investigatory. What we do have is separate information that has data on stops that were part of the STEPS traffic safety program. And if we look at that for 2013, we see that the disparity among STEP stops across racial categories is lower. African Americans are still, I think, 25% more likely to be stopped relative to other racial groups, but outside of non-step stops, they're, I think, 70% more likely. And so, how you interpret that is still hard to say, but the fact that maybe the disparities across racial groups decline when traffic safety is the primary focus would be encouraging, I think. It still says, well, what about all the other stops? And why there still is, a 25% difference. It's, again, this problem of we don't know what the baseline driving through these neighborhoods are, and it's hard to say. So I know there's been talk about changing or adding some reporting requirements to how these stops are. And so that might be useful. I think the concern there is possibly, you know, are you going to truthfully report when you have a choice of saying this was investigative or this was, you know, traffic safety because they didn't use a turn signal, but really it was investigative. And I think there are ways to design the implementation of that, if that's a possibility, that might give some answers. But I think that's a tough question, but an important question. So.
I think that from everything I've heard, May 1 is when that should go into effect. These new stickers that we use to do the reporting on have been ordered. IT is working on the program to implement that. Unfortunately, I initially requested a split in the department so we could collect half and not the other half, and IT banged their head against the wall a few times and said that would be a little bit much for them. So I think we're going to start reporting with everybody. But I think and the three categories that we have settled on, and I think it's the better definition, are a traffic safety related stop, a other police, like hotspot policing type stop, or a community caretaking type stop. So community caretaking would be more you had no intention of going out and working on a traffic problem, but something happened right in front of you, or you see something that's somebody needs to be made aware of. I guess a good example of the community caretaking stop would be you see somebody run over the curb, and you think, maybe this is a medical problem, maybe it's a DUI, maybe they just hit the curb, but I ought to stop and find out. So that should be coming online sooner rather than later. It ended up being more of a chore than I thought, but it is in progress, and we are doing that. So
When was that again? Maybe April,
May
May 1?
May 1st, so we'll get, if we're lucky, we'll get a month of data to play with. So that, I mean, it certainly wouldn't hurt.
well, and I think the one of the things that I'm looking at with this is not just about giving us answers for why the past is the way the past is. This is about how can we be better going forward. And so I think this is a positive step in that direction. And you know, there certainly is a lot of conversation at the police department about just that. How do we get better going forward? And that kind of speaks to your statement, Paul, and I agree with you. How do you make sure that people are reporting honestly? Well, that is a supervision problem at the police department, and it ultimately rests with the chief and how he instructs his supervisors. But as a supervisor, if I see somebody turning in multiple traffic tickets for taillight out, and we're coding them as traffic safety, I'm going to tell them, well, one of two things is wrong here. You're misguided in your use of time if you're going out on the street saying, I'm going to find one taillights out to stop and warn people about. That's probably not a primary focus for us. And secondly, if you're misrepresenting what your intentions are, then that's an ethics issue, and that's a problem in our police department. So you need to alter your behavior one way or the other.
So I have a question about the new reporting requirements. It will be known other than to the officer what type of traffic, patrolling he's going to do before he leaves. Is he going to know? Okay, today I'm just focusing on traffic. Traffic safety, if people are running lights, if they're driving too fast, what we would as regular citizens think of as we're driving, that we need to know that our vehicle is in working order and that if we run the red light, if we're driving fast, then we're going to, if a police is around, we're going to be stopped. But you're saying that unless there has been a calls for a specific area, there will not be any investigative stops taking place unless there's prior notification that these kinds of stops are going to be taking place after May 1st. Unless you see some caretaking, somebody is driving and running up on a curb and you think maybe there might be a medical problem, and so you stop them. And then even if you're going through a community caretaking stop, you're just checking when do you, we know that a lot of times a tail light out might lead to an investigative stop. So how do you make that what I'm trying to decide is how, or get in my mind, is where is the line that, when do we cross a line from being a community caretaking stop to then it leads into something more investigative?
I think that any stop can lead into different things. If I stop a car for speeding and I walk up and there's a bag of money, a face mask, and a gun on the seat next to the driver, I better ask some questions.
Right.
So I mean, those are the obvious things.
That goes.
But so anything can transition from one stop to another. And I think to like the traffic, the way we're going to define the traffic portion of this to indicate that our motivation was traffic, any of the step details, which are a pre-designed detail that are set up because of known problems identified either in the Regional Planning Commission's traffic safety study or through accident reports at the police department. For instance, or another one. So that's a step detail. It's predetermined where you're going to work, and it's predetermined why. It's because of identified traffic problems. So you mark that as traffic. But say I'm an officer and I'm working beat 6-3, which is the campus beat tonight or today. And I know in my beat, because I'm the one that takes the accident reports there, we've had a number of accidents up and down Lincoln Avenue because since we put the roadway diet in, there have been less serious accidents, which is a good thing, but we have a lot of rear-end accidents because people kind of follow a little close, and there's only one lane for traffic. And I suspect, from my observations, that some of that may be tied to cell phone use. So I intentionally position myself so I can watch for people using cell phones as they go down Lincoln Avenue, and I start making stops, and I make in the course of my day maybe 3 or 4 stops for that. Those are ones I'm going to mark as traffic because I was addressing a traffic problem, even though it was in my time, in unassigned time, I was addressing a traffic problem. Your question on the pretextual stops, which is the investigatory, if you want to call it that. You can call it a number of names,
Right.
but the type of stops, the investigatory stops that we've read about and pulled over, that we've talked about, that I believe are more likely to raise the numbers of specifically African American drivers that are stopped. The question you ask is, do we have to have a departmental plan for a specific area to make those stops? And the answer now is no.
Right.
And the answer that I would attempt to defend, that I would try to defend, is that it's in our best interest as a city not to say we won't do that. I think we want our officers to be in touch with the particular community that they're policing and understand the particular needs.
So I know your time is very limited, and I think the overall answer to one of the questions you asked was this new sticker is not designed to change procedure, it's designed to change reporting. What is in fact currently going on is going to continue to go on. It's just we're going to know which one is going on, what kind of stop it was. I do want to at least pause for a moment and make sure there are no more questions for Patricia's report before she has to leave, because I think this will come up again when we talk about the police procedure subcommittee. So was there anything else for Patricia right now?
I do.
Oh, please, go ahead, Alejandra.
The question that I have is about what are you trying to find and going to the court and interviewing people? What is the findings that you're trying to get?
Well, I just think that the testimony in terms of what happened at the stop, where you were issued a ticket, just interviewing them about procedural stuff and why they're there, and just interviewing them about the stop, and and if they're there to, some of them might be there to dispute the ticket itself, and why they felt like they needed to dispute it. I mean, I think you could just, there's a lot of information I think you can gather from observation and interviews.
One of the things that was interesting to me about the suggestion, and the logistics are a little interesting, was as a subcommittee, the impact subcommittee is really looking at what are the outcomes for folks. The folks coming out of traffic court are already, in a particular state of outcome, right? They've already decided or had to show up for traffic court. So the impacts we know there are going to be certain kinds of impacts from those folks, and maybe collecting those particular impacts is interesting, independent of whether they're representative of a large swath. And I think Andy's comment is well taken. We do want to get an idea of the impacts for people who were less affected or more affected. These would be, of course, probably the most affected folks. So I think it's an interesting idea to at least get a couple of stories out of there. All of the impact stuff with regard to the town hall and this kind of thing is going to be anecdotal at some level, because you're getting particular incidents and particular ideas, but it also will speak a little to impressions of people.
Well, I don't know how anecdotal that would be. I think that would be more factual. I mean, if they in fact got the ticket and they're in fact going through court and they're
Well,
in fact
anecdotal in the sense of it's one instance or a couple of instances of a particular kind. It's not going to be necessarily representative of everybody.
right. And I think that's where Andy's idea of maybe more targeted surveys. And I don't know exactly what how we would get that information, but
Well, I think that there is a method that we can do it to try to send out, and like I said, whether we do it every 10th traffic
Some of your
ticket or something
tickets.
like that, I think we could probably do that. And I think that just like ride-alongs are very informative, not it doesn't answer
Findings.
everything, but it does give you a better feel for it. Just going to traffic court is informative. I mean, just
I
sitting
think
in and
so.
seeing, I mean, even without talking to anybody, it's informative.
yeah, I think so. I think it would add to our report in the absolute eyeball witness, and that was mentioned in my report. Thank you, Chief, for setting up a ride-along. I forgot I am going on a ride-along on May 27th, so I appreciate it, Chief, setting that up for me.
Alejandro, you had a follow-up, I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I was going to suggest about that. If we want to create a fair report where we're going to get the testimony of the people who are affected receiving a traffic stop, I think it's crucial for our committee to be able to do a ride-along too.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I don't think that it will be a fair way of only describing what the people who are receiving the ticket as, however, what the officer has to say, or we as people who are study this traffic stop is our impression of when we're actually in a ride-along, that we have the opportunity to actually be the one in thinking, okay, what we will do if we are in the side of law enforcement. Otherwise, I will tell you that if we are not have some sort of balance in our report, providing the point of view also of the law enforcement, I don't think that it's going to be a fair report.
So, and I think we've talked about this a bit before. I expect as the part that's produced by the police procedures discussion to be that sort of balance. I am concerned if, for instance, the community impact report took a lot of weight from any ride-along simply because those ride-alongs are going to be impacted simply by the presence of the person there. And they're, again, going to be anecdotal. They're going to be one-off instances. We do want the community impact part of the report to describe the people who've had bad experiences. That's going to be important. We want the police procedure part of the report to describe what the police are actually trying to do and providing that balance that you're talking about. These are all going to be eventually woven together, and we're going to have to do that. But I don't think we want to diminish the bad things that happen to people by saying, oh, and by the way, in this part of the report, there are these good things. I think that will come along naturally, but I don't think we want to play down that people do have bad experiences, and we should talk about those fairly.
I don't want to give the impression that I was trying to diminish what the testimony of the people that were going to be interviewing in the court or the people that already been in the town hall meeting. The point that I'm trying to make here is what you just said, to have a balance in the way of, because how we can predict that when we will have a ride-along and we will have a traffic stop, how we can say that everything is going to be smoothly if we have never been there. I mean, it's something that, as
But it's
we
not
have
going to be my
mentioned,
impact that I'm going to be reporting on. I'm going for the ride along just to experience, the day in the life of an officer who's patrolling our community. I don't think that my ride along is going to have any impact on our community impact report, other than me having firsthand knowledge of being in a police car patrolling the community with an officer. It is community impact. That's why it is community impact. I don't know that, like you said, the balance or the fair reporting will come through the statistics, through the procedure and public engagement piece, and maybe even some of it. But community impact, we're looking for those specific impacts that they might have on individual drivers. Why the disparity is not only in the stop itself. The disparity can be in the impact of that stop. So, I think that's pretty much all I have to say, because I do need to get going.
Well, thank you for staying
You
as
all
late as
can
you.
contact me through my email, give me a call if you have any more questions. And Alejandra, you and I are on the same committee, so we can meet at any time.
Thank you, and we'll continue this conversation, but thank you for staying as late as you did.
All right.
I'm just looking at our agenda here. Why don't we quickly go to statistical analysis quickly? That will be the long one. Actually, before we do that, why don't we do the police procedure and public engagement, since it leads off of this quite well. I know Nicole has been crazy busy with a bunch of other stuff, and we're trying to get together to talk about the state of the subcommittee report. Andy or Alejandra, do you have any? I know that Alejandra provided a report this evening about the meeting with Chief Connolly. Do you want to quickly summarize or talk about what you guys have done so far?
I was not involved with the meeting with Chief Conley, and like I said, I just pretty much what I've gone over already, that we are moving ahead with collecting the data. It's later than I wanted it to be, but everybody's been very cooperative all the way along, and I think it's been a great effort that they've gotten it where it is. And the just the anecdotal point from, or part from me is that, that what we don't, what as a group we don't see is that the impact of this group is causing conversations to be had in the police department that are positive conversations. There are things that I think intuitively people know, but it's important to actively think about. And we've talked about bias and being bias awareness, and those are conversations that are starting to be come up regularly in the police department, and conversations that are being had. And I think there's been some positive impact that we may never truly directly see, but that it can be attributed to what's happening here. So just make you aware of that.
That's great to hear. Alejandra, did you want to comment on the meeting with the chief, or give a quick summary for those of us who haven't gotten through your message this evening?
Well, do you mind if I read?
Go right
Would you
ahead. No,
mind?
that's fine.
In my opinion, the meeting went really well. We have the chance of learning about what the police department is doing to our community, and I'm gonna just read what I sent to you guys. I was glad that we had the opportunity to meet and learn what Chief Connolly have implemented at the police department to outreach the community as a whole. I was also glad that he shared his philosophy and the information about the lack of resources that the police department is facing in order to address some of our concern with regard to the data collection effort. It is important that he mentioned that we have to look into numbers, the trend and the allocation of police in the community. I was glad that we all had the same concerns about why of the stop. And I was impressed that he addressed his officers to be more engaged with the community by meeting and recognizing the need of the neighborhood. A proof of that was increase of a neighborhood watch from 11 to 28 at the city. I strongly believe how we all agree of the importance of educating the community about their rights and responsibility, and the willingness to create educational programs that can encourage the community to participate and learn. And that was something that the chief, Nicole, and we were able to discuss and say that this is one of our biggest challenge, but it's also the opportunity and the engagement that we have with the police department that is proactive. I was also pleased to hear about his initiative to create the advisory team that include African Americans and Latinos, also with the collaboration of Chief Christensen and U of I with the Asian community. And again, I like to suggest about the Ride Along and the Citizen Police Academy in order for the community to be informed about police work.
Thank you. As I said, I've been trying to get together with Nicole. Our schedules haven't met up yet. Do you have a sense of when you'll have a write-up of some of this or the other information that the subcommittee's been working on?
Well, I think that Nicole and I, because my understanding for the last meeting was that you and her were going to meet.
And we have not yet, so you have been waiting on that.
And based of that meeting, we were going to be able to we as a team, we're going to be providing a summary of the report.
Okay, so hopefully I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Nicole said that this Friday we might be able to meet up, she and I, and then we'll hopefully go forward rather quickly after that. Any questions for Alejandra at this point? I'm glad this is moving forward. I look forward to the report of this meeting. I probably have a couple of questions myself to follow up on, but this sounds great. All right, and Eric is not here this evening for the social science report. He did give a summary report in the packet. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to make on that report? The one thing I noticed, and I'll convey this to Eric, I want us to be, and I think all of the committee should be aware of this, I want us to be very careful in our reporting about the use of certain legal language because it's meaningful. And I noticed that in his summary report, he conflated probable cause and suspicion. And I know that legally those are two very different concepts and have very different implications. And so I want to make sure that when we do our report, and I'll probably do some consulting with Andy about this, that we make sure to get all of our terminology right, because I think we don't want the wrong thing read in at any particular point on that. Was there anything else with regard to social science? Hopefully, we'll talk about scheduling it toward the end, but I do want to make sure that we get reports in and we can start our summary writing. Paul, would you like to talk about your statistical report?
And if I could first just maybe follow up on something I think you had mentioned earlier about the change in reporting, but not necessarily procedure. Because I think that it seems like this is an opportunity to, if not change procedure, reinforce what procedure should be. And so if I were doing this, I would love to, if there was a way to survey, to hand out a postcard with every ticket before we implemented this new reporting and after we implemented this new reporting, where before officers were just behaving as they generally are, and after they had this refresher on how traffic stops, traffic safety stops should proceed, how we should engage citizens when, we're doing something that's, we pulled you over because you ran over the curb and we were worried that you were having a heart attack. That kind of thing might change how people perceive or experience the outcome. And so maybe that's a chance to have a positive impact there or to see some change in how people experience traffic safety. But it's also maybe too short of a data or a time frame. But that's one thought that I would have, because I understand that it's tough to randomize, especially at a small department. But that's for another conversation. I guess I'll just try and briefly summarize what I put together in this exceedingly long report, which hopefully a lot of this is just some data that we've had for a while, and then some new things in terms of fines and calls for service. And so I tried to take a first crack at maybe how we might summarize these data in a final report. And I think our starting place is with the I.D.O.T disparity ratios, which we see in the aggregates range between 1.7 and 1.07. Part of that decline might be from a change in the underlying baseline, that the estimated minority driving population has grown over time. But if we break this out by sort of racial category, what we see is that this disparity is primarily a disparity among African Americans, that they're stopped at rates higher than we would expect, given their estimated relative distribution in the population. And so I think what we try and do then is say, what are some potential explanations or causes that might explain this? And so one potential cause is that there are socioeconomic differences that are correlated with race. And to the extent that some racial groups maybe tend to have younger drivers, and younger drivers are worse drivers, and that might contribute to why they're more likely to be stopped. And I think what the data show us here is that there are certainly differences across racial groups, that African Americans and Hispanics do, at least among those who are stopped, do tend to be younger. They tend to drive slightly older cars, but it's unlikely that demographics or socioeconomic differences alone could explain the disparities that we see. And so the next, I think, major explanation or something that we would suggest is that patterns of policing maybe have a lot to do with why the data look the way they do. And so I think there's certainly some support for this. If we look at calls for service by the sort of smallest geographic unit we have, the police geocode within each beat, we see a strong correlation both between calls for service and traffic stops, and also between the sort of number of minorities living in a neighborhood. And so I think those data are informative, but they're also sort of difficult to kind of tease out whether these relationships are causal or what's driving what. But we can also look at the kind of the disparity ratio, the hazard function at a geographic unit. And here I think we see also some suggestive evidence that the geocodes or neighborhoods with the highest number of minority stops, not surprisingly, have the highest number of minorities living in those geocodes. but areas where minorities are less likely to live consistently from 2010 to 2013 tend to have are more likely to be stopped in areas where they're less likely to live, and so I think that's again, with all the caveats about how we think about what this ratio can tell us, is what's the true driving population through a geocode like Meadowbrook Park. It's probably not the small estimated minority population that lives there, but something different. And still, that is suggestive that at least minorities, and in particular African Americans, are more likely to experience being pulled over. And so, the $1 million or $50 million question I think we're interested in is, what can these data tell us about racial profiling? And I think the tough answer is that it's very difficult with these data alone to say definitively one way or the other. And I think that we can do some tests. We can try and leverage the natural experiment that arises from the fact that if racial profiling is occurring, it should be harder to do when it's dark out than when it's light out, and when it's dark and light out varies over the course of the year. And in theory, that could be a very powerful test. In practice, there are both sort of assumptions that we might question, like a college town like Urbana, the minority population changes with the year, and so that we don't necessarily know what the true number is. And in practice, when we estimate these models, we get sort of inconsistent results that sometimes provide evidence of racial profiling, sometimes don't. And so, I don't know necessarily how we as a committee want to report or interpret that. I think, but if we turn to, I guess, the other outcomes after the stop or the way traffic laws are enforced, I think Andy raised a good point that it's maybe not the case that that rates of citations are wildly out of line except for Hispanics, and so I think we can revise that. But I think the types of stops that African Americans and Hispanics are pulled over are certainly different. I think the rates of search, particularly among African Americans, are higher. The duration of stops are higher. And then when we look at the court data, I think what we see is that, on average, African Americans and Hispanics tend to pay higher amounts. And I think what the data suggests is that this is because, first, they're more likely to be charged with multiple offenses. So in one court case, they may have a charge for driving without a license in addition to speeding, whereas other racial groups would have only one charge, and that they're more likely to be charged for offenses that Andy brought up, that driving without a license, that you have to give a ticket for, and that carries a higher fine. I guess maybe one thing to add to that or think about is like, to what extent, I guess, does this kind of create sort of a vicious cycle where a minority group or African Americans are more likely to be stopped. They're more likely then to lose their license, and then they're more likely to be stopped again because they lost, and then they don't have their license, and so they have to keep paying more. And I think, the report in Patricia's report suggests, that these things can build, and I don't, how we address that or whether we simply raise that as this is a concern that we as a society and as a legal system need to be thinking about is, maybe above our pay grade. And so I guess, in the end, I think the data sort of are what they are. I think they do suggest a clear disparate impact. And they suggest, there are probably multiple factors at work. And I think the solutions to these things are difficult, and I think they come from understanding what the community perceives. I think, the difficulty with, going to the court and talking to someone who just has had to pay a $1,000 fine is that they're almost certainly not going to be happy about it. But that perception and that unhappiness matters, right? That's what their friends hear, and it informs a community's perception of the legitimacy of, policing and their experience. And so I think that's important to take into account. And I think to the extent we can try and think about how these pieces fit together, I think the data can suggest that there are probably ways where we can do better. We're probably not, the tragedy that is Ferguson, but we can certainly be a better community. So I guess I'll leave it to questions. I know there's a lot, and a lot of this sort of secondary stuff I will try and fill in over the next week and provide more context for that. But
So an incredibly extensive and good report. I really appreciated it. I have not gone to the detail that I would like to yet. As I've told a few people, after next week, I will have plenty of time to be working on committee work. Do folks have specific questions for Paul at this point? It's a lot to digest. But if you've got, yeah, Andy.
I would just like to say that I think you're right. I think it can become a vicious cycle. And there are going to be, one of the favorite things that an old sergeant I used to work with said, he'd tell people on the street, look, you're in a hole right now, stop digging. So if somebody digs themselves a hole, it's hard to work up a lot of empathy for it, but if somebody else is digging the hole for them, that's something we need to look into, and that can happen. So that is a valid point and a good point. I thought that there is a tremendous amount of information here that is very, very good, and I want to publicly thank Paul for all the information he's given us, because and I heard a wonderful quote the other day. It's a Vin Scully quote, and it's a negative quote about statistics, unfortunately. It's sometimes people use statistics like a drunk uses a lamppost for support, not for illumination. Well, I think you've given us a chance to be illuminated by these statistics. I think these are very illuminating statistics, and that we can learn things from these, and we should. So thank you for everything you've done. It's been wonderful.
Here, here, very good. Any other questions about the report? I'll use this as an opportunity to bring up a topic that I had been chatting with Nicole about, and I wanted to make sure that everybody has input. And obviously, we don't have a good turnout tonight, but I'll make sure to ask folks offline about this as well. My anticipated next move after I start getting reports from each of the subcommittees is that I would assign myself the pen holder of get the report cobbled together. And I wanted to make sure that everybody was on board with that being the plan, that it would be me and probably a couple of other people. We would create the writing subcommittee, that I would take on the task of getting all of the reports together, using as much text from each of the subcommittee reports and making sure that they flow together. Is everybody okay with that plan going forward? I didn't want anybody to have the expectation of, we were just going to present a 4-section report unedited. If that's what you thought was going to happen, I wanted to give you an opportunity to say, whoa, I'd rather you not do so much editing or something. But I'm at least seeing nodding heads that seems like a plan.
I was really encouraged with everything that came in this month. I think that things are starting to shape up, and we clearly have differences of opinion within this committee, but I think that our general direction's been good, and I think we need to pull this together from more of a single viewpoint.
And my expectation is I'll get to working, or me and a couple of other folks working with Todd, working with, if we hopefully have a new staff person to also help us, that would be great. Now that Todd is doing double duty, and then at the next meeting we would start getting drafts of that grander report for folks to review and make sure that we're representing everything from each of the subcommittees appropriately, and try and get if not a majority, I'm hoping a consensus of everybody. I would love us to be just perfectly unanimous on, yes, we got it right, and it's fairly representing what we're trying to say. So that will be my aim. Anything else on subcommittee reports? Seeing no new business, and I want to make sure we've covered everything, we'll go straight to staff report. No, I'm sorry, public input. Anybody from the public want to address us this evening?
I will speak very briefly, if you don't.
Please, and if you would introduce yourself as you come to the mic.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for doing this. My name is Pat Connolly. I'm the police chief. I just wanted to share with you, and Paul, I haven't met you, I don't think we've met formally, but I've heard so many good things about all the stuff you've done, so I have to echo what Andy has shared so far. I have intentionally stayed away from this process for two reasons. One is I didn't want to unduly add a burden to anyone who felt like they needed to speak about the Urbana Police Department and were hesitant to do so in my presence. But just as importantly, I didn't want to be unduly influenced by getting information prematurely and either becoming defensive or trying to justify the actions of the police or not getting a full picture. So I was really excited tonight when Andy shared with me yesterday, by the way, that I should come to this meeting, hoping that we were going to start pulling some of the subcommittee stuff together because I am eagerly awaiting the responses. As some of you know, when Anthony Cobb and I started the leadership team in 2010, one of my first priorities was try to better understand, and Paul, what you shared tonight was just, it was warming because in 2010, we tried to better understand the I.D.O.T. traffic study overall. And I even went to Alex Weiss, the director, the person who created the study. And I said, please help me better understand this. And he got a PhD candidate to actually analyze 2007 to 2009 data for us. And he came back with an incredibly thick report that unfortunately only posed more questions than gave solutions or answers or direction. And that was actually posted on the CPRB website for years. So I'm looking forward to hearing. I think we have so much to learn from this, and I'm excited to move in that direction. I think it's very important to note that you said, I think we only have a month's worth of data, but it's better than nothing. It's very important that at least the committee understand, or I'm carrying this message, that this is only the beginning of the process. This, because the committee has now presented their report, doesn't mean that we stop collecting data, that we stop continuing to create better methods and more impressive methods of learning how to train our officers and learn from each other's experiences throughout the community. So this 1 month of data is going to be far more than that. But as I talk more in future meetings, if I'm assuming at some point you'll have some questions for me, I would like to explain the method behind the madness of those three categories, because one of the issues that I think we were lacking for so long with respect to this whole, and it's, as Paul said also, it's such a deeper problem than just traffic data. We never had the ability to say why, or at least we never forced people to say why. And this is kind of some groundbreaking stuff that I think will help us better understand as a police department why we do what we do. Because we have to have a reason for doing things, because all too often we go through life, all of us do, and say, well, I just did it because I could, or it was there, and when we focus more on why we're doing what we're doing, it makes us think so much deeper. So I just wanted to share that with you. This was my first meeting. It was very well attended by the committee. I was really impressed with all the input. And that was sarcastic, but I realized so many people have given so much of their time already that we're lucky to see this many folks here.
I appreciate you coming. Any quick questions for the chief tonight? I'm sure we're going to see him again soon. Thank you for your
Alrighty,
input.
thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Please come on up. And as well as we know you all, please do say your name and for the mic so we get it on the recording.
Hello, my name's Darrell Cruz. First of all, I really appreciate the comments from Chief Conley and also from Andy tonight. Again, I am just constantly impressed with the conversation the Urbana Police Department is having with this task force. A couple of quick comments. The one thing, Hopefully, all the reports can be posted. Andres, I don't think, made it up on the website, and I was disappointed. You spoke about Eric's. I was a little troubled because I read his report, and your comments, I think, are right on. The first paragraph, and we have officials here can speak to the issue of probable cause or reasonable suspicion. I don't think probable cause is used in the process of traffic stops, but I was even more troubled by the fact that he said police officers are legally entitled to make traffic stops based not only on traffic safety, but also if there is a probable cause to believe the car contains people who have committed a crime or may do so in the near future. Okay, we really need to ask him, you know, if we start putting comments like that in the report that traffic stops are being conducted for the purpose of investigating the possibility of a crime being conducted in the future, I don't know what that means or where he came up with that. And so a lot of these reports, we need to get them on the website. The public needs to look at them and review them because some of them, we need to be very, very careful about what we say. I would like to say in terms of Paul's report, he just keeps adding more and more data, and I have a number of questions. I think I will email him. There's one aspect to this whole thing I know, and I think Chief Connolly addressed it, and I know he said this in 2010, trying to understand why the disparities exist. And I think there isn't one answer. Okay, there are multiple answers. There's economics, there's the types of traffic stops, and those types of things that Paul alluded to. But there is also one additional thing, and I'm not sure how the task force can incorporate this into its report. I do not believe the Urbana Police Department is intentionally racially profiling. I think there are some people, and some of my friends believe that, but I don't believe that there's overt profiling going on. I hope not, maybe an officer or two. But what I think is occurring, and it's because of what I've read and studied in terms of pulled out, is that there's also, because there is decades long of historical information, and I'll use a term that the police department uses, the totality of circumstances, again, when you look at traffic stops. You look at numbers, you look at citations, you look at searches, you look at all of those things collectively together, there are racial disparities, especially as they affect African Americans. So what pulled over suggests is that over the past, probably starting in the 80s, the early 90s, it's a type of policing practice that becomes part of the way we police communities, sometimes without even knowing that how we choose to do our jobs to try to make our community safe has some unintended consequences. And those consequences are appearing like 15, 20 years down the road. And now we see that part of how we may be choosing to police certain neighborhoods have these types of consequences or disparities. So my point to you tonight is when you look at the book Pulled Over and you look at the recommendations, for example, and to me the fundamental question is investigatory stops and how they're used and how we police certain neighborhoods. If there could be a discussion with the Urbana Police Department to begin looking at what are the types of practices and policies such as training, such as emphasis of police in certain neighborhoods, are they having the desired outcomes that we want to have in improving our community safety, fighting crime appropriately, or are they also having this insidious racial undertone that creates the inability to be able to work with every community to solve crime? And it's creating, problems that we see throughout the country. So if there's it has to be somewhere. I don't know what it is, but it has to be part of the answer, and that is also reviewing policing practices and procedures in terms of how we've done things in the past. And that's not a criticism of the Urbana Police Department, okay? Please, it's not at all any more than as an educator that has to change different ways they teach as they know how kids learn. You don't do the things you did 20 years ago in teaching kids as you do now or will in the future. And so I ask that you, I hope you all got the little note I sent you, and this will not succeed to any extent, but I am very hopeful because I think Chief Connolly is seriously concerned about it, always has been concerned about it, and is interested in doing the right things for the community. And so those are my comments for tonight, I guess.
Any questions for Daryl? Yeah, Andy, go ahead.
One of the things that's come up a couple times, so I'll comment to it, and this is not directly to Daryl's statements, but it's important, I guess, to understand what a stop is as defined by the state of Illinois. And Chapter 725 of the Illinois Compiled Statutes 107-14 is temporary questioning without arrest, which is a stop. And it says in part that the officer reasonably infers from the circumstances that the person is committing, is about to commit, or has committed an offense. So while looking into the future isn't my strong point, there are, and if we go back, and there's a very significant court case in the United States, Terry versus Ohio, which deals with more than stops, but stop and frisk. But in that case, it was they anticipated that a crime was going to be committed, and just Reader's Digest version of that is that an officer observes a gentleman come out of a kind of a doorway, go down, look into a jewelry store, walk away. He's wearing a trench coat. He comes back. He looks in again. He believes he's scouting it out for a robbery, stops him and finds that he has a sawed-off shotgun inside his trench coat, and he, in fact, was planning to rob the jewelry store. And that's not, and that's why part of this also is that the officer reasonably infers that we wouldn't expect the person going down the street thinking about getting milk and eggs to reasonably infer that this person's going to rob the jewelry store. But the officer, it's their job, and we do expect them to make some inferences, and so that's part of how stops work and why stops work. The chief of police would be better to speak to this than me, but part of also what we're dealing with, and what you said about we need to change, we need to evolve, and we do, and we are. And some of the things in the book Pulled Over, if I go back to my early years on this police department in 1989, 1990, 1995, I did those things. The laws have changed, and as a department, we've changed. It's not saying that we still don't need to change. We absolutely do, and we're going to evolve and change in ways that we can't predict now. But part of the issue is not, and I appreciate the way you've stated it, in that the areas that we choose to police, but so much of what we do is not our choice. So much of what we do is reactive. While 4,000, or Paul, what was the number of stops last year? Was it in the neighborhood of 4,000? Somewhere in that neighborhood. 4,000 stops is significant. We also wrote 8,000 reports, and those are almost all responses to calls for service, and not every call for service results in a report. So it's not out of the question to say we responded to something like 16,000 calls for service. And I don't know what the demographic of those people that are calling us to serve them is. But there may be disparities there also, and there may be reasons why that occurs. So and that's outside the scope of the I.D.O.T. study, but that's all part of what, as a department, to get better, we have to consider and address from the department standpoint, not from the, like I said, it's a little bit out of the scope of the study here, but it's all part of what needs to be addressed.
I'll give you a second to add to your public comment, but I did want to remind the committee that we try not to use public comment as an opportunity to debate with the public, but I didn't want to, take the floor away from you. But the points are well taken, and I think also go to Darrell's earlier point that at least in our reporting, we do have to be careful about the terminology we use so that it's understandable, both that we get the legal terminology right and it's understandable to the public what we mean. But given that there was some discussion, I'm happy to reopen your public comment
Just
for a
very
little bit if you would
quickly.
like to,
Yeah,
please.
I don't disagree with anything that Andy has said. The only thing I think that is extremely important is that sometimes the word stop now is expanded beyond what we understood just to be a traffic stop, because we do stop people and there may be probable cause if you have a report or you have a suspicion or you see somebody acting. But that's irrelevant to me in terms of, oh, somebody is speeding or went through a stop sign or hit a curb, so you pull over and ask, and where would you assume that there's a potential of a crime being caused by just doing a stop? I'm specifically focusing on vehicular traffic stops. And those stops, as are reported in I.D.O.T, are not related to stops, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not supposed to be. They said to stops that occur as a result of a crime when you're pursuing somebody. They're not anything other than specifically for a traffic violation related to a moving violation, equipment, or a licensure sort of thing. And anything outside of that scope does not fall into what you're supposed to be dealing with, even though it's pertinent and it goes on. And so the disparities exist only in I.D.O.T traffic stops as I.D.O.T defines those stops. And that's, my understanding, is very specific as to what that is. And it's important to keep that clear, because that's what makes the disparities even a little more, I don't know what the word, it historically troubling, because they continue to exist, and it doesn't make sense that they should under that circumstance of traffic stops, is all I'm suggesting.
Thank you. Appreciate the
Thank
comments.
you.
Any other public comments? All right. Any staff report, Todd?
No.
Okay. Any announcements from folks? Hopefully, we will not have everybody off being busy and away. I know this is a terrible time of year for the university, trying to catch up before and after spring break. So I appreciate those of you who were able to make it tonight. And I know my schedule is going to free up quite handily come April 1st. So I will be ready to dive into this report head on. So thank you all for coming, and we will call this meeting adjourned.